Good morning, everybody. It's Mike Stevenson here. So we're going to do a webinar today about business activity monitoring with Serverless 360, and we're going to talk about simulation of a real-world case study. I'll come on to that in a second. So just a quick introduction. So I'm Mike Stevenson. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I'm based in Newcastle, which is in the north of the UK. I've worked with Azure for about 10 years, delivering real-world integration solutions and cloud solutions. Some of you may have been involved in some of the community activities that I help out with. So if you've come across Integration Monday before, I help run the Integration Monday webinars where we talk about integration in Azure most Monday nights, so feel free to check that out. I also do a book called Integration Playbook, which is an online resource to help people with integration scenarios and cloud scenarios. And I'm also a product advisor to Serverless 360, so I help design some of the features that Serverless 360 has to help customers sort of deliver the real world operation use cases that you need to support cloud solutions. So what we're going to do today is I guess maybe about 6 months ago we did a webinar where we introduced the Serverless 360 business activity monitoring feature. The link's on the screen there to the previous video, and it was like a sort of 101 introduction, what it is, how to get up and running. And today what we wanted to do was, rather than just show the basics of how to kind of connect this up, which I'll talk a little bit about, but what I really wanted to focus on was where's the value that BAM brings to your solution. So it's really about if you start using BAM, what can you do with it? How can it help you in a real world scenario, and really just focus on what BAM brings to the table rather than just the introduction of how to use it. So we're going to go through a real world type case study, and I'm going to sort of showcase some of the features it has, and hopefully everybody will like a lot of those. Now, just a bit of getting some of the sort of basics out the way. In the webinar, we have a Q&A capability, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A window. Some of the product consultants from Covi are online at the minute, so they can help if there's any particular questions that pop up. But what I'll also do at the end, I'll loop through some of the questions, and we'll kind of go through and see if there's anything people want to know a little bit more about. But as I say, today we're taking it to the next level. But there's also that previous video if anybody wants a bit more of an introduction. So if you're not familiar with Serverless 360, the first question is what is Serverless 360? So just touching on that for a second, Serverless 360 is a complementary tool to the Azure portal, and what we recognized is that the Azure portal really focuses on that hardcore Azure person who's got a lot of experience, knows what they're doing, has a lot of privilege to be able to do advanced things in the Azure portal. But the problem with that is it means you need that big learning curve. You need to be able to know what you're doing to be effective with the cloud platform. Now, the challenge is that for many companies, you build these solutions and they have to be supported by people who might not be Azure experts. And there's a significant benefit to your cost of ownership for your solution if you can help people who aren't Azure experts be able to support some of the solutions that you build, and that makes everybody's life easier, but it also lowers the cost. So Serverless 360 focuses around that use case in a number of different ways. The first way is we have something we call composite applications or business applications, and you can see on the screen here, this is really about the operations view of the services that you have in the cloud. So really it's about how can I take things spread across Azure, bring them together and package them to say this solves a business problem, treat it as a group and manage it as a group. So that really kind of narrows the scope and gives you those least privilege type audited features where you can kind of make it easier to support a solution. So the second use case is about something we call resource map. So if you've got lots of things on the cloud, the challenge is how do you kind of organize them so when they're spread across many subscriptions and resource groups, you know what things logically grouped together, and have you got them for your development, test, production environment, etc. So we have this resource map capability that helps you kind of manage your Azure resources in a much more effective way. If you think of it being a bit like how a library would organize a group of books, instead of just having a big pile, you can put them into shelves and you can have a sort of way of managing that more effectively. The third key use case is the one we're going to talk about today, which is business activity monitoring. So if you're developing solutions in the cloud, the big question is how can I make some of this information about these business transactions implemented in the cloud? How can I let my business see what's going on? And also, how can I give them a degree of self-service so they can manage some of their own transactions? And that's really about, you know, especially people from an integration background may be familiar with a scenario of integration being like a black box where you know, a lot of really important stuff goes on, but nobody really knows how it works. And business activity monitoring is about creating the visibility, and on the back of the visibility, a degree of self-service can really help the business be involved in the solution. And it's also a great way to kind of promote what these technical transactions do, and gain confidence in the users that they're doing a good job. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. And in the BAM capability, so if anybody's not familiar, BAM's the acronym for Business Activity Monitoring. And in the capability that we have, we've got 4 key areas. So we've got this idea of track, where we can track the transactions, you can search for them, and you can see what's going on. We've got a monitoring capability where we can create monitors for transactions and kind of get alerts if things are going wrong and that kind of thing. We can do graphs and dashboards based on some of the transactions, and we can sort of analyze, see how they're going. And we have the ability to offer up reprocessing of transactions. So if something goes wrong, you know, instead of having to escalate a support ticket through numerous help desk areas to get the right person to deal with it, we can give some self-service and let the business retry some of their transactions, which you can pick and choose when you do that. So they're the key areas we're going to touch on a little bit. And if we take a step back for a moment and think about how does BAM fit into a solution that we build. So here we've got an example of an activity flow. And often when we think about the requirements of what we might be asked to build in IT, we'd have something like this where we might receive an order, some decisions made, and then some actions that happen. And you know, the business requirements are usually formulated a bit like this, where it's a simple, understandable view of what's going on. The problem is that when we develop the solution, we end up having lots of moving parts, lots of different technologies involved. And actually, one of the things with the cloud is the decomposition of solutions mean probably more than ever before we have many working parts that would implement that business requirement. So the challenge is, how do you see across all these moving parts something that makes sense in terms of how my transaction executed? So in this case, we might have SAP, SQL, functions, and logic apps involved. So the idea is that if we can represent this business transaction inside of Serverless 360 BAM, and then we can send telemetry from the execution within our technical implementation, so our cloud components can tell us what's going on. We can bring those events together and we can represent that business transaction in a way that the business can see how it's actually executing behind the scenes. The idea for the support operator is that if we can focus more of their time on managing business transactions and less of their time spent working out where things broke inside of the technical solution, that's where you start being able to deal with support tickets quicker, deal with business problems quicker, and hopefully you can make the support operator have more time available to do higher value tasks. There's also an element where self-service can come in, because we can let the business potentially fix some of the business transaction issues and then escalate things they can't handle, so that we can give a better experience to the end user. So what I'd like to do in today's session is go through a couple of use cases. I'm going to sort of illustrate the business problem, and these 2 use cases are going to work together and extend each other. And we're going to show how the use case would work in the real world, show some of what the problems that you would have in the real world, and then how we can put BAM into that solution and what it gives us at the end of it. So we're going to think about initially, sorry, just jumping ahead there. Initially, we're thinking about a logistics tracking use case. So we've got things being moved around and we'll get information about what's happening. And we're going to have an event processing scenario here. So imagine we've got some manufacturing processes going on that take orders from a factory and they deliver them to a customer. And we've got a B2B partner who does some of the tracking of our trucks doing the delivery, but the events from that B2B partner need to be sent to different systems in our organization so we can keep track of what's happening and know what's going on. So this would involve integration of B2B events to multiple systems within our business. So if we imagine a scenario here, and you might enjoy my little animation in a moment that's going to kick off, but we've got Costco manufacturing. We've got our integration platform in the middle. We haven't really specified the technology at this point, just to understand that there's, something like that diagram before. We've got service bus, logic apps, and that kind of thing going on. Our integration platform is going to get events from our transport partner, and we've got our line of business applications on the back end that need to be integrated with. So we've got SAP, we've got IBM, and we've got SAP. And playing through what happens, our truck might go to the factory, it gets loaded, and our partner gets these events from the systems that we have with them. And those events come to our integration platform, and you can see typically an event, in this case, it might just cascade like fan out across multiple systems. Everybody gets a notification that a truck got loaded. The next thing that happens is when we send a truck to the customer, the truck leaves the factory, so we get another notification. It goes to all of our systems. And then as the truck's en route, we might get various updates about how it's progressing. If it stops, it starts, it does various things. So we get all these notifications as it gets loaded, sent out, and as it travels to a customer. So if we think about some of the business problems we have in that use case, a couple of things that really would be common to many people would be things like, how do we know if all of the systems got their updates? How do we deal with maybe one of the systems had an error and we need to know that that error happened, and how can we deal with it? And we might also have a question about what happened to a certain truck. Can we see the events matching to it and that kind of thing? So they would be some of the common challenges that you would have from a supportability perspective. So if we think about the implementation behind that, so let's imagine we've got a scenario a bit like here where we've got factory and truck events go to the transport partner, and then we might have given them some kind of URL that they would post events to. So that might hit our API management. Our API might forward to a logic app or something, and then it might send an event to event grid, and we can do some kind of pub sub scenario. So we might have a whole bunch of different, in this case, I can subscribe with logic apps. They'll get the different events. So maybe I've got an event for truck leaving the factory, an event for it getting loaded, and a transport update event as it goes on its journey. That could be 3 different events possibly. We might have different logic apps that handle those, something like that. But the idea is that with Event Grid, we can add new subscribers and manage those things into the systems. Now, if we bring BAM into play here, what we would do is we can have, in this case, we can just have the different logic apps can send BAM events to Serverless 360's BAM API. And then that's where the user would be able to use Serverless 360, and they'll be able to see what's going on and kind of manage those transactions. And we get all this visibility of what's going on under the hood without having to be a logic app expert, an event grid expert, or really know anything about the technical implementation. It's almost like I don't really care anymore. I'm just managing my business transactions. So the demo we're going to show, we're going to touch on a couple of areas. I'm going to show how to design a business process. We'll take a little bit of a look at the tracking, and we'll touch on some of the dashboard stuff. So if I jump back over, so I'm just going to go back a couple of screens. So I think what I was saying originally was that in Serverless 360, the bit most people will be familiar with is our composite application / business application area, which is this one on the top left. This is the operations view. So if you're an IT support operator and you're managing your Azure resources, this is the way we can like put it into a business context, and you can simplify managing a solution rather than managing a platform with many different services on it. The bit that we're going to focus on today is this little folder here, which is our business activity monitoring area. And straight off, I've got a dashboard, which we'll come to later. But to begin with, the bit I'm going to look at is the business processes. And what we have down here is I've got a list of all these different business processes that I've done for different demos, and we've got this one called Truck Tracker. The other bit I've got here is I've also got global properties. So a global property is a way that I can say, here's a business interesting attribute of data, and I can then have my BAM events can sort of tell BAM that this bit of data here in this message is actually this business value. And I can basically search off these various business values. So you can see I've got things like a truck ID, tracking number, and a few different things in here. These are really the ones that you're going to search on a lot of the time. Now, if we go into my business process, the truck tracker, here I've got a number of different notifications. So at the top, I've got the very simple one here, which is the notification received. So every time I receive a message from the B2B partner, this transaction will execute, and I'll say, here's an event to say I've received a notification, and here's a stage where I'm telling the BAM that I've actually published that to Event Grid. So we can basically search for those notifications if we need to. I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll just skip the showing how to add a new transaction, but you basically just click this button up here, and then you can start editing a diagram like this. So one of the things that I'm able to do, I can do things like add a new shape. So I can put step 1 in here. You can configure various properties about it, and that'll put a new shape on your diagram, and you can kind of link these things up. So I'll just discard that for now. Now, what you can do on your stages here is you can also specify properties. So I know that one of my logic apps is going to tell me that this transaction started, and it's going to send me a message. And here in my properties section, I'm promoting some business values. So I can go add property. I can either choose one of my global properties up here. So I could pick job ID would be an example. And I can say things like, how will I be told about this property? So I could do things like searching a message body using things like XPath, regular expressions, or JSON queries. I can look in the headers if I want, if I've sent those over from my Azure component, and I can then promote that job ID. Now, if you look here, things like, say, the truck ID, I'm querying a message body for a property in the JSON that would be sent called truck ID. And one of the really cool things in BAM about this is once I've got my Azure components sending the BAM events, what I could do is if a new property, let's say they sent a JSON message to us, so they might be sending us a copy of the message that got received. If I found there was another property that was really interesting, I could add that property here and start tracking a new bit of that JSON without having to redeploy anything to Azure. I can just add a query of the message that's being received. So we've got our stages here. Our event would come in. We can have a quick look at a couple of the other transactions. So that one's a pretty straightforward one. The one where the truck gets loaded to SAP is a bit more complicated. So I'd receive a message. I've got different stages here. If I wanted, one of the things that I could do would be we can put condition shapes in. So I could go, what happened? I could just tell you it's a condition stage, and that would give me a typical sort of decision shape for an activity diagram. So you've got that choice if you want one. And you can basically put these transactions together, and you kind of create the ones that you want to show to the business. Now, depending, when you come to the implementation side of this, if we take a quick look at my, so I'll go look at my truck dispatched. So we'll look at the SAP one, for example. So if you can see in Azure here, I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit to help people. So I've got my my event grid down at the bottom. Here's my transport events. So you can see I've got a bunch of subscribers here. So you can hopefully can tell from the names we've got truckloaded to SAP, truckloaded to IBM, and they're really forwarding onto a bunch of logic apps. And my IBM truck dispatched handler. So what I'm doing in here is I'm going to add the shape for serverless 360 BAM, so we can set up a connector, which is all documented in our documentation how you do that. And I can use a number of shapes now. So we've got this shape called start transaction. I'll just show you here. So you can see I've got checkpoint, checkpoint with correlation, and start transaction. There's the three different shapes I've got. I'll not go too much into the detail of them today, but I guess at a really high level, normally what you would do is you'd start a transaction, and then you can do checkpoints to update to say what's happening with that transaction. That's the most common way you can do it. You can also do checkpoint with correlation, where it's a bit more decoupled in a way that you fire events and you can correlate things based on the business IDs. So you could say everything on this transaction name with this order ID joins together. So there's two different ways you can do it, which we've talked about in the previous session. But the most common and simplest way people would do it would be you do a start transaction here. So if you imagine I receive my event grid message and I'm just going to throw the message body straight to BAM, so I can do some queries. I can also send a message header. So here I can say, here's the logic app ID and the name of the logic app. Here's the target system, and I can say, here's it's my truck tracker business process. Here's my transaction name, and this was successful or not successful. So if we have a quick look, I think this was IBM truck dispatched. So we have a look at the equivalent transaction here. We've got this message received shapes, the one that I'm implementing here. And what I can do to keep it quite simple, I've got a delay, so just simulate some things happening in the real world. And then I've got a couple of checkpoints here. So I've got, if you imagine, I've got one checkpoint for each of these outcomes. So the delay just simulates maybe doing 3 or 4 calls to the IBM system. And what I do on my checkpoints, if you imagine this error scenario, I got a transaction instance ID when I started the transaction, and I basically just go, here's the instance to update. Here's the stage. It was a failure. It was successful. I can pass a message if I want to. And I can also implement down here, I can put a catch block where I can have a checkpoint if some error happened. And really, all you do is you just add these checkpoint shapes where you've got a milestone that you want to send information to BAM, and that'll basically start opening up, opening up the visibility of this this diagram. So what we'll do next, if we have a quick look at the tracking side of things, so we'll go up here. So this business processes is where I design my business process, and if I want to see how they're executing, I go into the tracking area, and what I'm able to do is I can do some searches. So you can see here, this action required we'll come on to in a minute. But what I can do is I can do a search, and I can say, look for things where business process, I think it's process it's called, equals truck tracker. And I can do a search. I think I must have spelled the name wrong or something, but I can do a search and just find some stuff. There we go. So I haven't had any events for 15 minutes, but I've basically got this demo running all the time. So there is quite regular load going through, so we'll be able to look at some real things. Now, the first thing to note is when I've done that query there, that's pulled all the columns back, which makes it, I'd want to customize that a little bit. So what you can do is you can choose which columns you want to see. You can save some kind of filter criteria in here, and you can save a search. So if I go and look at a couple of the searches I've saved up here, so I've got truck tracker notifications would be the first one. So that was the first business process we looked at, and this is telling me about every notification that I've received. So you can see I've got, I have like a little test logic app that simulates the transport partner sending me a series of events about trucks. So you can see the most recent event was truck 404, who I got an update. So I can go into here and I can see I received my notification, it was published, and I can see there's a little bit of info about it here. I don't think I must be saving the message body, but if I wanted to, I could save the message body so it's viewable through BAM as well. And you can see we've got these different message types telling me the different events that I've received. So that data is all getting promoted from BAM when if I go over here, so notification received. You can see all these properties here that were getting promoted from the message body. They're the things that are appearing here. So let's say I had my truck dispatch received. I saw there was a problem with it. I think you'd find in the properties here. So I've got things like the Logic App ID that I passed up. If I wanted to, I could go back, and if I needed to somehow go and check the Logic App to see what was going on lower than BAM, I could find that Logic App dead easily out of the hundreds of thousands I may have had executed as well. But this really gives me a business-friendly way of looking at those transactions we've received. So let's have a quick look at our dispatched one. So I think it was IBM truck dispatched. So here's my truck dispatched event. So what we can see here is I've got a slightly different view where I've brought in more columns. And this lets me see now, because I'm promoting slightly different events. So we'll just show that in here. So you can see I'm promoting a slightly different range of properties now, so I can have a bit of a richer view for this particular event. So I can see I've got a customer ID, I've got the target system, I've got truck force. So one of the things I could do is I could modify my query here, and I could say everything where customer ID equals 5, and then I can see I've got all the messages for that given customer, and I could see, oh well, maybe there was a problem update in IBM, maybe there was a problem update in SAP. I could also do like, so we got 407. So you can see I've got the inbound event coming in. Now what you might find is that truck 407's probably been through the factory multiple times and been to a number of different customers. So if I go back more than 7 days, I might have to go back even further actually, depending on when it was last used. So I can see the entire history of truck 407 where it's been used many different times, and it's done different orders for different customers. So this starts becoming really useful for the business to be able to say, answer common questions. Like one of our common business problems was what happened to truck 53. Well, here we've seen what the history of truck 407 was, doing different orders and that kind of thing. Now what we can do as well is we can look for things like errors. So I've got a search here called truck tracker errors. So this would let me find all of the errors for this business process where something went wrong, so I can go and see what happened. So here we've got the truck loaded event to the data warehouse, and there was an error loading it, and I could see here's the exception message that my Logic App chose to throw up, and I could make that more rich if I really wanted to, or something like that. If you've configured the retry capabilities, so one of the things you might be able to do, I don't know if I've actually got it reconfigured. Yeah, I have. So one of the things I could do is I could configure a retry process, and in this case I've got a message archive down here, so I could go and see the message, and I could confirm the reprocessing, and then that lets the support operator or the business user could resubmit a message to an endpoint that you've configured, whether it be a queue or an HTTP endpoint or something. And you can see I've reprocessed that message now, and that one should hopefully go through and have loaded back into the system this time. I think the errors that I simulate are just a random time it'll throw an error kind of thing. So the retry should hopefully go through. What you can also do though is we know in the real world we often need to know what things do we need to look at. So we have this action required tab, and the idea here is that if you get an error, if we can flag them all up, so here I can go things like, right, I know this is an error, I know I need to do something with it. I might go, right, what happened? So we can have a look, we can see how we can fix this one, can we reprocess it? So I could say, yep, that one's can be reprocessed, so we send that, and that one should now be taken off the action required list because we've sent it for retry. If that retry errored, then we'd see a new message would appear in the action required. This time we might have these two where we can go, actually, we've looked at these, they've recovered some other way, we don't need to do anything with this, we can just ignore it. So I can go, right, this is fine, whatever the reason we choose to ignore it. And that means they get taken off the list, and we can just manage this like work item list of things we need to do to make sure everything's working well. What I can also do is I've got the option, say with this one here, I might decide, right, I need to come back to that later, so I can mark that as a favorite. And then I can go and see that on my favorites tab. So if you've got quite a lot of messages going on, you might come back after lunch and you can easily find that out of the quite a few errors you might have to deal with. So that's an easy way of keeping on top of it. You might also do things like, I might say, right, I'll need Ezel to look at this one. So I'll just assign that to her. And I can put a bit of info in here, and she's going to get a notification. I've given her a transaction now, so I'll apologize for putting an email in your inbox. I'll just assign one to myself, actually. So I can go to the assigned transactions, and I'll see I've got a couple that I've assigned to myself here, and I can go and look at those and do something with them. And so that's really about the kind of track and sort of operate these transactions and kind of keep on top of them. Now, the other thing that we can do is I can do some dashboards. So you might be familiar already with in our kind of composite applications, we've got the ability to have dashboards, and you can also do a dashboard for BAM transactions. So I can create a new dashboard here. I can add some widgets to it, and I can do various shapes like a graph, that kind of thing. Just wait till this loads up my. For a second, I'll just go and show you on a normal dashboard. I just edit the one I've got, so I can go and edit my bit here. So you can see what I've done here is I've created a graph based on business processes. I've created a top chart, which basically lets you create something like a bar chart. And I can, I've used the message property called message type here. And basically what this graph does is it lets me see a count of the number of different types of event I've received over, like in this case, I've chosen to do it over 7 days. I've got a count of the number of events received today over 7 days. The outcome, this one's quite interesting. So the outcome of processing that event, so this is the notification itself, so that all the notifications got successfully put on the event hub, which is a good thing. I'll just save that. But I can also do sort of like, let's say, the events by system ones. This lets me see if like things like the errors here. So I know that I've had more events go to the data warehouse, and this is because on the event grid, I take every event to the data warehouse, but not all of them to IBM or SAP. And I can see like the different transactions here. I can see like how many there've been at different points in time, and you can really create your own custom dashboard based on what kind of works best for your interpretation of the business processes. And I've made 2 or 3 different ones here. So hopefully that gives you a good intro to the the kind of setting up a business process, setting up the tracking and that kind of thing. Now, what I'd like to do next is come on to the second demo, which will cover a slightly different use case. So that one was really about receive an event, pub sub, load into systems, and it was very much like a messaging type scenario and an EAI scenario. But sometimes we also have what I'd call a complex orchestration scenario. So in this case, we've got the idea that when the truck arrives, we have a more complicated integration process. So instead of just cascading a fan out of events to systems, we've actually got to orchestrate across those systems. So we might go to system 1, do something, then 2, then 3, then back to 1, and sometimes there might even be manual processes in place. So what's going to happen in this case, if we imagine our truck that was en route to the customer, when it arrives, we get an event from the transport partner, and our integration platform will go to one of the systems. We're also going to have manual approval that I'm going to demonstrate as well, but you could see how it had to go across the systems in an order. It couldn't just do everybody at the same time. So it went to SAP, got some data, got an approval, went to the data warehouse, updated an IBM. And the questions in that process, the integration implementation is much more complicated because there's probably, a number of things going on. How do you track where it is in that process and that kind of thing? And that's really what we're going to look at in this demo. So common problems that your business user might experience are, where are we in that process? Again, we've got questions about the truck. Is there any outstanding trucks that have delivered their order, but we haven't finished that arrived at customer process yet? And can we easily identify and deal with those? So what we're going to do here is this demo, it's very similar to before, but there's a bit of an extension on this one. So we get our event from the transport partner, it goes to the event grid, but this time it's the truck arrived event. And instead of fanning it out, we have this one logic app, and that logic app's much more complicated. And he's basically going to go to IBM, to the data warehouse. Sometimes, but not all the time, he's going to go to Power Automate, and we're going to use the Power Platform's approval process to get the business user involved, because if an order's of a certain criteria, we need somebody to manually check it. And that's a much more complicated scenario. So how do we get that one involved? So if we put BAM in again, what's interesting this time is, in addition to events from a logic app, I can also send events from Power Automate, and we send them to BAM, and we create that simplified, business-friendly representation of a much more complicated implementation, and we can start seeing what's going on without having to be an expert in the technologies that implement that transaction. So if I jump into this demo then, so I think what we'll do to begin with is we'll take a look at the business transaction. So we've got truck arrived. And straight away you can see this is way more complicated. So we've got a number of steps here. So we've got a logic app that's going to pick up from the event grid. We'll or trigger from the event grid. We'll receive the message. The first thing we'll do is load something into SAP, and we'll get an invoice created. We'll then decide if it's a large invoice. If it is a large invoice, we're going to have an approval. And when I implement that approval, as I said, I'm going to use Power Platform to do that. Then we're going to complete the process and update IBM, update the warehouse, and then everything's done. Just like before, I've got different stages. I can promote different properties. So I'm, at the start, I'm going to promote a lot of stuff to make it easy to track what's going on. And I think if we have a quick look at the logic app now, so we've got this truck arrived logic app. So we can see over here, we receive our event. We start a transaction before, and all I'm doing here just to show that there would be some stuff going on if I use the scope shape, but there's not really anything in it. It's a representation that I did something with SAP, and it lets me focus on the BAM events. So you can see after I've done all the work that I might do in SAP, I might have a checkpoint to say the SAP bit's done, and then I might do some more work and do another checkpoint. In my condition here, if it's a large invoice, then I might have a checkpoint to say that I'm going to ask for approval. So that's going to match to this one over here. And if anybody's interested, what I'm doing to call out to Power Platform is, and I'm going to show you that approval process in here. So I'm just going to do a webhook call to the address for the Power Platform, and I'm going to pass some info so I can get a call back into my logic app when it's done. And then again, it's just a number of checkpoints. So if you think about, like, if I think of a real world logic app that I've seen that implements something like this, when you consider all of the requirements to integrate with a specific system, this might be multiple logic apps, or it might be a logic app with 100, 200 shapes in it. It could be really, really complicated. So having, it's something you'd really need to know how that logic app worked in a lot of detail to understand what's going on and how to support it. And the idea is with BAM, we can create this much simpler view of what's going on. So here, I might have 10 shapes. My logic app might have had 100 plus. Really, the BAM shapes are about where are the important milestones so I can help somebody understand what's happening. So we go to our tracking now. So here, so I'm just going to check my notes to, yeah, cool. So here we've got a saved search for arrived trucks. So like before, I can see I've got notifications coming in. I can see different things. So here I've got the notification received transaction and the truck arrived transaction for truck 404. So I know it's customer 12 and I can search based on various things. And I can straight away, I can open that up. I can see what happened. So this one wasn't a large invoice, so it went this route. And I didn't need to do an approval in that. I think if I remember right, so here I've got message tracking on this one, so I can see, right, what was the message received event? And I've got the option of letting somebody see what that message looked like if I need to. So that will give you access to the JSON if you wanted to, or something like that. And I can kind of see how this is going. I can see the track properties if I've chosen to track any on other shapes. And that really, I've just got that business-friendly view of how that's running now. What I also did is that I said sometimes we've got an approval. So if I go to my arrived trucks in process query, you can see here these are the trucks that we've received that needed an approval and it hasn't been approved yet. So I think we got this one this morning, I think was the last one to come in. So you can see here I've received my truck and I've indicated that the approval request's been asked for, but we haven't had a notification back to tell us in BAM that approval's happened. So I know that's the stage it's currently blocked at, and I know somebody needs to do something about that. So what I'm able to do is I've got my truck ID over here, truck 400. If we take a look in the logic apps, this would have been this webhook shape out to flow. And if I now bring in my my Power Platform bit, so what you can see here is I've got this truck tracker approval flow. And what I'm able to do, it's quite a simple flow to get a quite useful feature. But I receive a message, parse it, and then I can start an approval here. So this is really just the Power Platform, Power Automate kind of shape that you get for doing an approval. And I've said, here's my truck ID, etc., etc. One bit to just show here is in the custom connectors. You'll see I've added BAM as a custom connector here, so that lets my Power Automate can send BAM events from a flow now. So all I'm doing here is I've got my checkpoint. So what I'm doing is once the approval's been done, I can send my update to BAM to tell it that it's been approved. And then it'll do an HTTP callback using that webhook URL back to the logic app that sent the original message, and I can continue my execution. Now, what's quite cool about that is if I look in the business approval bit, so if anyone's not familiar with Power Automate, you've got this action items bit up here, and you can go to approvals. And this is where if you launch an approval from Flow, you can see them show up in here. So you can see these are the trucks that are waiting to be approved. So let me remember what the ID was. So I think it's truck 400 we're waiting to approve, is the most recent one. And you can see here, please approve truck 400. And I can click on that and I can see some of the data that's been sent to the approval. So I know the truck ID, I know the order, I know the customer, etc., etc. And I can decide what I'm going to do with that. So I'm going to approve it. And that'll basically finish that flow off, send it back to my logic app, and then that'll continue processing. So if I jump back over here now, you should see hopefully that one will have gone. Yep, so you can see truck 400's gone off this list. And we can probably search in here truck 400. So you can see here would have been would have been the one that finished off. So what we'll do, just to show that again, we'll pick, so if we get the in progress, we'll pick truck 207. So extend my days there. So there's truck 207. We know he's in flight at the minute. So if we just go through that again, we can go to flow. We know we've got 207 here. So I'll approve him and go, yep, you're fine, you can go. And then we should be able to go back, and within a second or two, we'll see this 207 should have finished off. Just refresh my browser there, I think I might. Friday equals 207. There you go. So we've got all of our events for truck 207. Actually, I think it was only the query, wasn't it? Just take a second. Copy that bit. So truck arrived. It was older than 24 hours. There's truck 207. We can see he ended up finishing off, and that was all good. So I think that the last bit for this demo is just the dashboard, and I've got my truck arrivals dashboard, and I can see that we've currently got 4 trucks that are in progress waiting to be finished. That'll be the remaining approvals that we had. We've got total truck arrived processes that have executed, and you can see I did a little graph here to show how many of each state there are. So again, you can articulate to the business user the things that they would like to see using these graphs to give them a high level kind of view of what's going on. So jumping back to the slides then, if we sort of think about what the next steps are. So we've shown how you can use some of the various BAM features to sort of showcase business-friendly views of that really complicated under the hood implementation. I've really shown today how you can send events from Logic Apps or from Power Automate, but actually it's really just an API call to the BAM API. So in addition to Logic Apps and Power Automate, it will be quite easy you can do it from functions, you can do it from a policy and API management, you can do it from custom code. There's not really anything you couldn't send a BAM event from. A couple of things that we've got out of the box, the connectors, other things you might have to put your own little bit of code in to fire your events, but you can choose when you send a milestone, because you're really identifying in that process here's an important bit, and I want to tell you about it. Now, if we think about the different types of monitoring, so sometimes people don't necessarily aren't clear about the difference between technical monitoring versus business activity monitoring. So the technical monitoring, Serverless 360 can help you with the the Azure resources itself. So this is really about, is my Logic app working? Is my function working? Is my queue working? The business activity monitoring is really about, is my business transaction working? And they're 2 very distinctly different things. Your Logic app might be working, but your business transactions might still be failing, or vice versa, depending on how you handle errors and stuff. So one of the common things we see is sometimes customers struggle where their Logic app, the developers built a Logic app that really nicely handles errors, so it always shows up as successfully completing in the Azure portal, but actually the error failed, and just because it didn't blow up, it didn't show as an error, but the transaction itself wasn't successful, and it's really hard to manage those. So that's one of the key areas BAM can help you. A couple of bits of more info. I think I might just jump in a second and show one other bit I think I forgot to talk about in the demo, was the monitoring bit. So we do have some monitors here as well, so we can configure queries. So if you're familiar with a data query, one of the things, I think I've got this for a different demo setup, but you can set up a data query to say, I expect certain things to happen at certain times, and you can have the calendar can show red or green. So for example, if you expect one event a day or something like that, you can have that show up in the calendar, and you can trigger alerts if business things aren't happening. And the other one's the exception monitor. So here you can say, if my business process has an exception, so one of those transactions failed, you can make it trigger an alert, which I think is a really handy feature as well, because as we know, I just touched on the fact that a technical component might fail, but the process might still be successful. So a couple of bits of documentation here. So we've got a BAM getting started guide. The integration playbook has some videos that talk about some different scenarios of how you can do stuff, which people might find useful. And we've got the link for our previous webinar if anybody wants to see it. And I think the other thing is as well, if anybody wants like a little bit of help or a walkthrough or a help getting started, our consultant team are really good at helping people do that. At this point, I'll just open up for any questions. I think there's a couple in the thing. So we've got a question from, let me get a better screen on for the questions actually. So Philip asked the question, are you able to externally query the BAM track? And I'm thinking our business users would want a more simplified UI so we can create our own front end, then query BAM tracking data. So with that one, Philip, absolutely. So one of the design decisions we made with BAM was to let the customer provide a SQL Azure database that you'd like your BAM data to go in. So we had a lot of discussions early on about that, and we felt that that was by far the best option, because what it means is that the customer's then in control of that data. They can put their own governance structure around it. And then our BAM API and our serverless 360 portal would just query the data. But then you've got control of how much you want to scale your database, how you want to do your backups. But it also means you can build your own apps on top of it as well. So one of the customers that I've worked with, we did a Power BI dashboard on top of the data in BAM, which is a really good way of kind of helping. So you might say, if in your case, your IT department wanted to use BAM to manage the transactions, but then you wanted to give a Power BI dashboard to let some business users see things about what's going on, that would be a completely valid scenario. It may be something where we might offer a Power BI capability or a template maybe at some point, but I've done a couple for customers. It's really, sometimes it's about being, the BAM stuff being accessible for you to innovate on how you want to use it, because different people might get different benefits out of it. So yeah, you can do that. And if anybody else has any questions, I think that's the only real one we've got at the minute. Feel free to pop any other serverless questions in as well if they're not just about BAM. Don't feel free to kind of throw any other ones out there, and we can answer those or do follow-ups if people would need that. Cool. We'll hang around for a few minutes for questions, but I think people can feel free to drop off if they want, and follow up with an offline question if they need to. But we'll hang around for a few minutes and see if anybody else wants to ask anything. Otherwise, I hope everybody's enjoyed that session, found it useful. If anybody wants to chat anymore, feel free to get in touch either on Twitter or over email. If I can just maybe make a shout out for some of the community stuff we mentioned at the start. So if anybody wants to check out Integration Monday or Serverless Notes is another community thing we have. So there's loads of good information on there and videos and stuff to help people implement solutions with Azure technology. But I hope everybody has a great day, and hopefully we'll see some more serverless webinars coming up in the coming weeks.
Covey.co